Well, good morning. Happy Thanksgiving, everyone. If you got your Bibles, I'd invite you to get them out. We're going to be in Matthew chapter 5 again this morning, where we are in the story so far of the life of Jesus Christ. It's the early years of the public ministry of Jesus. Several months have passed now since Jesus first made his presence known, when he appeared one Passover in Jerusalem and began to miraculously heal people and to announce the coming of the kingdom of God. And Jesus shows up in Jerusalem, and he's got something to say to the authorities in the temple there. He causes a big scene. He's calling them out for turning God's temple into a marketplace, a place that made them rich off the backs of the people. This is when we actually met one of the rulers of the Jews, a man named Nicodemus. And Jesus explained to him, one of the few leaders of the Jews, Nicodemus was one of the few Pharisees that did actually believe in Jesus. And Jesus met with him and explained what was going on, who he is and what God had sent him to do. But as we talked about for a while now, what's become evident as we've worked our way through the story so far, most of Old Nick's peer group, the other Pharisees and members of the Sanhedrin, the ruling council, the leaders of God's people, they have no use for Jesus. They don't believe him, and they don't want him around. So it irks them to no end when they see the popularity of Jesus only grow with the people and grow exponentially and grow fast. John 2:23 says, "Now when he was in Jerusalem at the Passover feast, many believed in his name when they saw the signs that he was doing. And when he leaves to return north back to his home region of Galilee, by the time he gets there and in the following weeks and months," well, Matthew writes in Matthew 4:23, you can see it, "And he went throughout all Galilee, teaching in their synagogues and proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom and healing every disease and every affliction among the people. So his fame spread throughout all Syria, and they brought him all the sick and those afflicted with various diseases and pains, those oppressed by demons, those having seizures and paralytics, and he healed them. And great crowds followed him from the Galilee and Decapolis and from Jerusalem and Judea and from beyond the Jordan." Jesus is a big deal. The people are listening to him. They're following him, and many are believing in him, and the Pharisees hate it. They want him gone, and they have begun to look for ways to make that happen and to watch for opportunities and information that they can use to take him out. Anyway, we spent a lot of time on this disagreement, this battle between Jesus and the Pharisees. But last week, we began to turn our attention to a different group of people, a crowd of people that are following him around, his disciples, those who do believe in him. Again, this is more than the 12. Jesus has a large group of followers. Luke tells us in his Gospel, chapter 10, that at one point, Jesus commissions, he sends out 70 of his disciples on a mission to preach and do miracles on his behalf. And we don't know how many people followed Jesus around, but it was a lot. And one day, Matthew 5, verse 1, "Seeing the crowds, he went up on the mountain, and when he sat down, his disciples came to him." Like I said, we don't know the head count of the crowd up on the mountain that day, but whoever was there heard the words of the longest sermon of Jesus in the Bible. Words directed not at the Pharisees, not at the disbelievers, but at them, his followers, those who do believe him. Like I said, the longest recorded sermon of Jesus in the Bible, known as the Sermon on the Mount. Now remember what Jesus is teaching. He's teaching the people about the coming kingdom. He's calling them to the kingdom of God, his kingdom. And the way that Jesus often does that is to compare his future kingdom, the kingdom that's coming from heaven, to the present kingdoms of the earth. And Jesus often contrasts the present reality of life under the fallen kingdoms of man, of life under the rule of the powers of darkness, with the future reality of life in this kingdom of truth and righteousness and justice that is coming. And now Jesus is going to focus on his followers, those who believe what he's telling them about himself. They believe he's the Messiah. They believe God has sent him. They believe he really has a kingdom and that it really is coming. Now Jesus is going to speak directly to them, and he's going to begin to reveal what his plans are for them. He's going to begin to explain to them that they actually have a part to play in the work of his Father. They're not just receivers of the salvation of God. They're going to be participants in it. God's great plan of salvation for his wayward creatures is about to take a step forward. Things are about to change. Jesus is teaching his followers, my Father has something new in store. And guess what? It's not just me, it's you. Jesus is teaching his followers how they'll take their place in history. He for sure spends a lot of time teaching them who he is and what he's doing, but he's not going to be here for long, and he knows it. So part of what he's doing as he goes about his Father's work is to prepare these people for what's going to happen when he leaves, when he's not with them anymore. And he wants them to know that when he has accomplished what his Father had sent him to do, and he's returned to his Father, that they will be the ones to carry on with his Father's plan here on earth. It's going to take a while to bring his followers up to speed on this. They have a lot of things to learn. It's going to take some time for Jesus to correct some wrong turns his people have taken with their understanding of God and his word. They've got a significant amount of things that they believe that it's just not right. And it's going to take him a while to teach what is right. And he wants to teach them things that they've never thought of before, and it's not going to be easy. And by this time, Jesus only has about 2 years left to teach his disciples everything his Father has told him to tell them. Now, having said that, I don't want to give you the impression that Jesus is struggling to do this. Like he's thinking, oh no, I got to hurry up, running around worried, what if I don't get this done? No, Jesus is God, and he will do everything he is supposed to do, and nothing will stop him. And his followers will be prepared exactly as his Father wants them to be. He's not sweating it, he'll do it. John 17 is Jesus' prayer right on the night before he died. His prayer for his disciples, as he's speaking to his Father, he says this, I have manifested your name to the people whom you gave me out of the world. Yours they were, and you gave them to me, and they have kept your word. Now they know that everything that you have given me is from me. For I have given them the words that you gave me, and they have received them, and have come to know in truth that I came from you, and they have believed that you sent me. See, Jesus will accomplish everything his Father has given him to do, including the preparation of his followers for their part in his Father's upcoming plans. Last week, actually, we looked at the first 12 verses of the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' opening statement to his followers. This famous section of the Bible known as the Beatitudes, or the blessings. A series of 8 statements about who really are the blessed ones in this corrupted and deceived and upside-down world. Who really are the fortunate ones in this world where Paul says we wrestle against the cosmic powers over this present darkness, against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly places. And we don't have time to go over all of that again, so let me just summarize what Jesus says. Oh, the blessedness, oh, the future that awaits the poor in spirit and those who mourn. For the meek and for those who hunger and thirst for righteousness. Oh, the fortune in store for the merciful and the pure in heart and the peacemakers. And for those who are persecuted for righteousness' sake, these people will be blessed beyond measure. Because when my kingdom comes and sweeps away all the darkness, they'll be left standing in the light. And they'll receive mercy, and they'll be comforted, and they'll be satisfied. And they will see the face of God, and will be called his sons and daughters, and they will inherit the kingdom of heaven and earth. And then after delivering this incredible series of promises about the future, he says to them all, verse 11, Blessed are you when others revile you and persecute you and utter all kinds of evil against you falsely on my account. Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven, for so they persecuted the prophets who were before you. Jesus is like, you're the blessed ones. You're the meek and the peacemakers and the merciful and the pursuers of the righteousness of God, and the world will hate you for it. You'll be persecuted and you will suffer because of me, Jesus says. But good news, rejoice, be glad, for great is your reward in heaven. Great is the future in store for you. Jesus continues, look at verse 13. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden. Nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket, but on a stand, and it gives light to all the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who's in heaven. So, it's a mouthful. What's Jesus saying here? He's continuing to explain to them their future. His Father has a plan, and they play a part in it. And Jesus is beginning to let them in on what his Father has in mind for them. And apparently, the plan is that these people, his followers, those who believe in him, that they'd be two things: the salt of the earth and the light of the world. And Jesus is like, rejoice and be glad when you're persecuted. This isn't new. This is what's happened to God's former messengers, the prophets, and this is going to happen to you too. But congratulations, there's no more prophets. It's now you. You're the new messengers. This is all part of the plan. You are now the light of the world. Remember when Jesus was in Samaria and he talked to the woman at the well? Remember what a big part of their conversation was about? See, she was a Samaritan, and they believed that the true worship of God happened on Mount Gerizim. And the Jews believed something different. They believed that true worship of God happened on Mount Moriah. That's where Jerusalem is built. And this Samaritan woman asked Jesus to clear up this disagreement. She asked Jesus, who's got it right? My people or your people? It's an important question. Who has the right understanding of Scripture? Who has the right understanding of what God wants? Jesus is going to answer. He tells her that the Jews have it right. But then Jesus tells her something that would have been astounding to her. He tells her that pretty soon that won't matter at all. That pretty soon the true worship of God isn't going to be confined to any location, neither Gerizim nor Jerusalem or anywhere else. Something new is coming, Jesus says. Pretty soon people will be worshiping my Father in spirit and truth wherever they are. Remember that story? Okay, so something similar is happening here. Jesus is revealing some things about his Father's plans, and it's more than they would have been imagining. Question: where has God's light in this world been located up until now? His nation, right? Israel. They were supposed to be the keepers of the light. God's desire when he rescued the family of Jacob from Egypt was that they would be his own nation. A nation that would show all the other nations who he is. A nation that would push back the darkness of this world and shine the light of his truth. In the minds of the people listening to Jesus that day on the mountain, where did they think the light of God came from? Where did God's light in this world emanate from? Well, not from people, from the temple. That's where God's light in this world comes from. That's the center of it all. That's why all the sacrificial system and all the temple functions and the holy days and the annual feasts, they're all centered around Jerusalem and the temple. That's the center and source for all truth in their world. In their minds, that's where the light of God resides and emanates from, or at least it's supposed to emanate from there. The reality is, the light of God, the light of the temple in Jerusalem is now flickering and fading at best. It's a pale shadow of what it used to be and what it's supposed to be. In the beginning, right after they left Egypt, God used to lead them in a pillar of fire and cloud. His very presence lighting the way for his people. And then when they made camp, when they stopped traveling, the light of his presence would shine over his people as his light rested over the tabernacle, over the most holy place and where the Ark of the Covenant was. The miracle of God's presence was with them on clear display for all. And a similar thing happened centuries later when God's temple in God's city is completed, when Solomon leads the people in prayer at the dedication of God's permanent home. The presence of God again comes to dwell with and over his people. His light again coming to rest over the temple, a light for all nations to see. Well, that was a long time ago. And by the time Jesus arrives on the scene, the light is long gone. Solomon's temple itself having been destroyed 600 years before. And even though a new temple has been erected, God's presence, God's light has never reappeared over the temple. But nevertheless, this is the way the Jewish people would have thought of God's light in the world. It's centered at the temple. And just like Jesus told his followers in Samaria, The worship of the Father will no longer be confined to one location, to Jerusalem. Jesus tells his followers today on the mountain, the light of God in this world will no longer be constrained either. Yes, the light in the temple has gone out, but don't worry, my Father has another plan. He has many lights for this world. He has millions of lights in store for this world. And guess what? You're going to be those lights. And unlike the light in the temple, your lights are never going to go out. The light may go out sometimes in some places, but not for long and not completely. In the end, the light will prevail. My Father's light will never be extinguished on this earth again. And you are all now that light. That's the plan. Just like Noah carried the light of God's truth out of the ark to restart humanity, just like Abraham 400 years later carried the light of God's truth from Sumer, from Babylon to the promised land, just like another 400 years later, the family of Jacob carried the light of God's truth out of Egypt and into the kingdom of Israel. And just like the prophets down through the following centuries brought the light of God over and over again to the people of God, to his people, declaring the truth generation after generation, Jesus says, my Father's plan now calls for something new. He has new light bearers, and it's you. You will now carry the light of my Father in this world. More than that, you will now be the light of my Father, and you will light up the whole world. My Father is going to turn the lights on in this world of darkness, and those lights are you. Look back at verse 14 for a second. A city set on a hill cannot be hidden, nor do people light a lamp and put it under a basket. What's Jesus saying here? Well, he's just told them incredible news, right? He's just told them what God has in store for them. He's just given them a series of statements about how blessed, how fortunate they are, and how they're going to be hated for it. And he's just told them that they will be the meek and the poor in spirit in this world, and they will be the peacemakers and the righteous in this world, and they will hunger and thirst and mourn in this world. And he tells them the world will hate them for it and will persecute them for being these kind of people. And he tells them that despite the persecution that they'll face, that they should rejoice because they will be rewarded. They will be made sons and daughters of God. Rejoice, there is a day coming when you will inherit the kingdom of heaven and earth. And then Jesus is like, and my Father wants everyone to see it. Just like no one builds a city on a hill in order to keep it hidden. Hey, lots of good reasons to build cities on hills. Hiding it is not one of them. No one would build a city on a hill and then try to hide it, is Jesus' point. And no one lights a lamp and then covers it up. If you don't want to brighten a room, why would you light the lamp? No one lights a lamp and then blocks out the light. Verse 16, in the same way, let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father who's in heaven. In the same way, this is my Father's intentions for you, Jesus says. He isn't making you lights in this world in order to hide you or to cover you up. He's lighting you and setting you on a hill. He's putting you on a stand. He wants the world to see your light. So shine your light, he says. Shine the light of my Father in this world. Don't hide it. Don't cover it up. Let your light shine before others. It's what he's made you for. He wants the world to see his people, to see his lights, to see their good works and give glory to the Father. Okay, good works. What does Jesus mean by that? Feeding the poor, helping little old ladies across the street, random acts of kindness, paying it forward, looking after the orphans. Is that what Jesus is talking about? I don't think so. None of those things are all good, but I don't think that's what Jesus is talking about. When he says good works, think good as in morally good, as in works exactly in line with the purposes and character of the Father, that the world will see that the works that you do are good. So what are these good works that Jesus is referring to? Well, I think what Jesus is referring to is what he just said before. Have a look at verse 13 again. You are the salt of the earth, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored? It is no longer good for anything except to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. Before Jesus tells them all that they're the light of the world, he calls them to something, or he calls them something else, the salt of the earth. What does that mean? And then he says this little bit about salt losing its taste. can't make it salty again, then being trampled under feet. Okay, so what's going on here? What's Jesus saying? What does he mean that they are the salt of the earth? Well, thankfully, we don't have to guess at that. We know exactly what it means. Luke records a slightly expanded version of this saying of Jesus. You could turn there for a second. Luke chapter 14, Matthew, Mark, Luke. Luke 14, verse 34 says, "Salt is good, but if salt has lost its taste, how shall its saltiness be restored?" First thing, this phrase, lost its taste. This is the same phrase Matthew uses. It's one word in the Greek, and it means to make foolish or to become nonsense. The idea is to lose its essence or lose its nature. It's more like salt is good, but if salt ceases to be salt, how shall its saltness be restored? How can it be made salt again? It can't. That's Jesus' point. Salt that isn't salty, salt that has no saltness is useless. And then Jesus says in Luke 14, verse 35, "It's no use either for the soil or for the manure pile. It's thrown away. He who has ears to hear, let him hear." Okay, what does salt have to do with soil and manure piles? What exactly is useful about salt when it comes to soil and dung? First thing to know, okay? The salt metaphor that Jesus is using has nothing to do with eating. Okay? Don't think of like salt and the salt shaker on your kitchen table. When we hear the word salt, our minds picture the salt we have in the kitchen, on the table or in the cupboard. That's not what they would have pictured when they heard the word salt. See, there's a large body of water that lies just to the east of Jerusalem. You might have heard of it. It's called the Dead Sea. This sea, of course, is being so close to Jerusalem, is mentioned several times in the Bible. And this name, actually, in the Old Testament, if you wanted to look it up, it's called the Salt Sea. And it's a very unique body of water on the earth. It rests at the lowest point of land on the earth. The Jordan Valley dips actually 400 meters below sea level at the Dead Sea, and nothing flows out of it. The Jordan River and other rivers empty into it, but it's so hot and dry in that place that it never really overflows. The water is evaporated so rapidly from it. So you can guess, as the water is constantly kind of boiled off, it leaves behind the minerals and the salts that were dissolved into the water. And over the years and the centuries, the concentration of the salt has built up to the point where the Dead Sea is 5 times more salty and more full of minerals as any other part of the ocean. A lot of these minerals are different kinds of salts. And those minerals, these salts, were valuable and they were useful. So the Dead Sea is harvested and its salts sold and used. Salts from the Dead Sea is a ubiquitous part of life in Israel. And when Jesus says salt of the earth, this is where their minds would go, to the salt that they were familiar with, the salt that came from the Dead Sea, to the salts that were useful to them, salts they used in their everyday lives. And Jesus mentions 2 such uses for salt. 2 things that people use salt for in their world, and neither one has any relation to pepper. Salt and pepper, as we think of them, is not a thing in their world. So what did they use salt for? Luke 14, verse 35, "For the soil and for the manure pile." Okay, so how was salt used with soil? Okay, so in order to get good quality salt, salts without dirt and debris in it, where you collected the water and you poured it out in as a wide and shallow a container as you could find or build, and then you let the water evaporate and then scrape out that container to harvest the salt. And in this process, you would scrape up some sodium chloride, that's what we call table salt, but very little. You'd be scraping up a lot more than sodium chloride. The Dead Sea waters contained heavy concentrations of several other minerals, one of the most plentiful being what we now call potash. Anyone know what potash is used for? You put it in your garden to help plants grow. It's fertilizer. That's one thing that they use salt for. They put it on their fields, and it's what helped life to flourish and grow in the soil. What about the other use for salt Jesus mentions, the manure pile, the dung heap? Okay, so there was no bathroom in the houses in their days. There's no room in the house dedicated to that in their world. There would be a place outside somewhere for that activity, where people would go to relieve themselves, and some of those places would be more private than others. What would you find at these places, these dung heaps that the people used? Well, there would be a hole or a pit of some kind, and beside the hole would be a pile of dirt. The idea being that you'd do your business and take a little dirt and cover it up. And also at these places was usually kept on hand something else. Yeah, salt. There would be a little pile or a bag of Dead Sea salt somewhere by the hole or the pile of dirt. And when things were getting a little too ripe, shall we say, around the old dung pile, you'd take a handful or two of salt and you'd sprinkle it on, and it would lessen the smell. The salt would actually hamper and slow down the process of rot and decay, and thus the stench of it. And the point Jesus is making is salt does things. It's useful. It does good things. It rejuvenates the soil. It helps life grow and flourish. And it sanitizes the rot. It neutralizes the decay and the stench of it. And Jesus says to his followers, that's what you are. That's what you're going to do. You are the salt that will rejuvenate the earth. You're the salt that will hold back the decay. This is my Father's plan. You will be the salt of the earth. He's going to spread you all over the world, and you will nourish this world, and you will bring help for life wherever you go. You'll be the salt of the earth. You will hold back. You will neutralize the rot and decay of this world. You'll be a barrier standing for humanity against the forces of corruption and the stench of their wickedness. You'll be salt. Go back to Matthew 5 for a second, or actually for the rest of the sermon. Jesus says to them, "You're the salt of the earth. You're the light of the world. Let your light shine before others so that they may see your good works. Let the world see your saltness." It's what you've been created for. You're my Father's work. Show the world. Show the world by the way you give life and nourishment to the world around you. Show the world by the way you resist the darkness and shine the truth. Show them, prove to them that my Father's word is true. John wrote in the beginning of his gospel, "In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. In him was life, and the life was the light of men. The light shines in the darkness, and the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man sent from God whose name was John. He came as a witness to bear witness about the light, that all might believe through him. He was not the light, but he came to bear witness about the light. The true light, which gives light to everyone, was coming into the world, and that light came. And it came in the form of a man, the Son of God, Jesus of Nazareth, the one who is standing there talking to them. And he will one day soon stand up in the court, in the temple, in the middle of a feast, and announce to everyone, 'I am the light of the world, and whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. I am the light of the world, and I will give my followers that light, my light.'" See, Jesus knows he's leaving. That's the plan. He, Jesus, the true light of the world, is going back to his Father soon. But he's going to leave something behind, the light of life itself. And Jesus says, it's you guys. From now on, or from soon on, you'll have a piece of something in me, in you. You'll have my light, the light of life, and you will not walk in darkness. You will light up the darkness wherever you go. That's who you are. That's my Father's plan for who you all will be. You will be the salt of the earth. You'll never lose your saltiness. My Father's work will not be undone. His plans will never be swept into the street or trampled like dirt. You'll be the light of the world, and all will see you. You will never be covered up. You will shine my light all over the earth. On the last night before Jesus died, in his prayer for his disciples, he asked his Father, John 17 again, Jesus asks his Father, "I am no longer in the world, but they're in the world, and I'm coming to you. While I was with them, I have kept them in your name which you have given me, but now I'm coming to you. I have given them your word, and the world has hated them because they're not of the world, just as I am not of the world. And I do not ask that you take them out of the world, but that you keep them from the evil one. They are not of the world, just as I am not of the world. Sanctify them in the truth. Your word is truth. As you sent me into the world, so I have sent them into the world. Jesus asks his Father to protect his followers and to sanctify them in his truth and to keep them in that truth as they're sent out into this hostile world of darkness. Now, did God answer Jesus' prayer? Well, it's 2,000 years later, and the followers of Jesus Christ, the light bearers, have not been covered up or swept into the trash yet. In a world where sometimes, and maybe often, looks like the powers of darkness are winning, in a world where truth is ridiculed and truth-tellers persecuted everywhere, in a world where people invent lies and love them, a world bent on and condoning depravity in ever-increasing forms, in a world where it looks like the light of God is more scarce and more hated and more attacked than it's ever been, I'm not too worried. Our Father in heaven has told us everything we need to know. And although the day may come when my light is taken from me, that's okay. My Father has many more, just like me, and his lights will never go out. And I will rejoice, for great is my reward. His work will never fail. We will all be salt and light in this world until our end or the end, whichever comes first. None of our enemies can snatch us from his hand, and none of the trials and tribulations that we might face can compare with the joy in store for us when our King returns. And until then, as we wait for him, we will be who we've been created to be. Salt and light, a chosen race, a royal priesthood, a holy nation, a people for his own possession, who proclaim the excellencies of him who called us out of darkness and into his marvelous light. Remember the word that I said to you, Jesus said. A servant is not greater than his master. If they persecuted me, they'll also persecute you. Indeed, all who desire to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will be persecuted, while evil people and impostors will go from bad to worse, deceiving and being deceived. But you are the salt, and you are the light, and you will take no part in the unfruitful works of darkness, but instead expose them. In this world you will have tribulation, but take heart. I have overcome the world. You will be salt, and you will be light, and you will never go out. Don't hide from the world. Get out in the world and live out your good works for others to see. Shine the light of truth wherever you go. Take your place in the long line of those who have carried the truth of God in this world through the ages. You're the salt of the earth, and you're the light of the world until I come back, and it will cost you, but rejoice. The price is more than worth it in the end. Now, just before we finish, I want to touch briefly on what Jesus says next. Have a look back at Matthew 5 there. After Jesus has set this sermon up, after he's explained to his disciples who they really are and what their role in his Father's work is, he's going to turn to another topic, the law. See, this is what the Pharisees were always so concerned with, right? This is what he was always in trouble for. In their eyes, he didn't always follow the Torah, the law. He was a lawbreaker to them. And Jesus is now going to address this subject. And he says in Matthew 5:17, "Do not think that I have come to abolish the law or the prophets. I've not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them. For truly I say to you, until heaven and earth pass away, not an iota, not a dot will pass from the law until all is accomplished." Jesus is like, now, I don't want you to think that the law isn't important. It is. I haven't come to abolish the law, to destroy the law, to discard the law. Far from it. I've come to fulfill the law. I've come to uphold the law. I've come to live a life of total obedience to the law of my Father. And I tell you, there's not one punctuation mark that will not come true. I will accomplish it all, Jesus says. Okay, I'm bringing this up because I know the tendencies of my own heart. And perhaps there are others here whose minds go where my mind goes sometimes. Sometimes when I hear things like, blessed are the meek, and the pure in spirit, and the peacemakers, and blessed are the mourners, and those who hunger and thirst after righteousness, I think, man, I've got so much work to do. I fall so far short on many of those things. I hear Jesus say, you're the salt of the earth, and you're the light of the world, and it doesn't feel like it sometimes. There are many times when I could have and should have been salt when I wasn't. And there are so many times when I could have shone the light and I shut up and covered it up instead. And here Jesus lists off these things that I'm supposed to be, and I think I've got to work a lot harder. That is not the message Jesus is giving here. Jesus has only given 2 commands in this whole speech so far. He's only given 2 instructions for those who believe in him. The first one is in verse 12, where he says, "Rejoice and be glad, for your reward is great in heaven." And the second one is in verse 16, where he says, "Let your light shine before others." Jesus' instructions so far are, you, the blessed ones, rejoice and be glad, and don't hide it. That's what he says we're to do. The rest of his words are promises. He'll do them. He'll do those things. He will make us into everything we're supposed to be. He will do it. What he asks of us is that we rejoice in that and show the world that it's true. Why did he bring up the law? What's the end game of the law? What's going to happen to the law in the end? Jesus says clearly the law's not going anywhere. It's here to stay, every stroke of it. So what's going to happen to the words of God's law that he inscribed with his own hand on tablets of stone? The law that none of us can keep. The law that we're all guilty of breaking. The law of God that our flesh struggles so much against. That's our relationship to the law now, right? That's what it feels like, doesn't it? A struggle in my heart. Paul says in Romans, "I know that the law is holy and that the commandment is holy and righteous and good. So I do not understand my own actions, for I do not do what I want, but I do the very thing I hate. I have the desire to do what's right, but not the ability to carry it out. For I do not do the good I want, but the evil I do not want is what I keep doing. I delight in the law of God in my inner being, but I see in my members another law waging war against the law of my mind and making me captive to the law of sin that dwells in my members. Wretched man that I am, who will deliver me from this body of death?" I know who. Jesus. He can, and he'll deliver, and all others who will believe in him too. He is the law keeper, not me. He is the one who lifted up the burden of sin in this world and walked undefiled by it through this life. And he's the one who chose to pay the price of breaking the law when he never broke it. The only lawkeeper there ever was volunteered to be treated like a lawbreaker. And in doing so, he faced the consequences of a lawbreaker, and he took a punishment he never deserved. Jesus, the Son of God, the only one who completely upheld his Father's law, went to the cross and then to the grave because I can't keep the law, because we can't keep the law. And what's he going to do with that law now? What's he going to do with the law that he has accomplished to the last iota and dot? If he's not going to destroy it, what's he going to do with it? Well, he's going to write it out again. This time not with his finger on tablets of stone. This time with his own blood on our hearts. God has promised, "I will give you a new heart, and a new spirit I will put within you, and I will remove the heart of stone from your flesh and give you a heart of flesh. And I will put my spirit within you and cause you to walk in my statutes and be careful to obey my rules. Behold, the days are coming, declares the Lord, when I will make a new covenant with the house of Israel and the house of Judah. Not like the covenant that I made with their fathers on the day when I took them by the hand to bring them out of the land of Egypt, my covenant that they broke, though I was their husband, declares the Lord. For this is the covenant that I will make with the house of Israel after those days, declares the Lord. I will put my law within them, and I will write it on their hearts, and I will be their God, and they shall be my people." That day is coming. Yes, there will be persecution. Yes, there will be failure. Yes, we are not everything we are supposed to be. And we all feel the pain and the struggle of that. But rejoice and be glad. Lift up your hearts and let your light shine, because he is changing us. He is writing his law on my heart and on yours. And one day he'll be finished, and our hearts will be then completely new. No longer shall each one teach his neighbor and each his brother, saying, Know the Lord, for they shall all know me, from the least of them to the greatest, declares the Lord. For I will forgive their iniquity, and I will remember their sin no more. And we will never want anything but God's good law ever again. The struggle will be over, and the desires of our heart will never wander from him again. Listen, what is God's law? God's law is freedom. God told his people, don't lie. How free would we all be in this world if no one ever said anything that wasn't true? No one ever misled or deceived anyone else. No one ever doubting if someone's intentions matched their words or not. God had told his people, don't steal. How free would we all be if no one ever took anything that didn't belong to them? The locksmith business would be pretty sparse, I would think. When God led his enslaved people out of Egypt, when he set them free from their bondage, he gathers his newly freed people together and says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of slavery. Here is the law. Here's how to be a free people. Jesus promised, I am the light of the world, and whoever follows me will not walk in darkness, but will have the light of life. And if you abide in my word, you are truly my disciples, and you will know the truth, and the truth will set you free, and if the Son sets you free, you'll be free indeed. Blessed are those onto whose hearts Jesus is writing again the law of God. How fortunate are the ones whose hearts are being transcribed with the freedom of the law of God. There is a day coming when the last stains of sin will be gone. A day when we'll be free from the struggle to be who we're supposed to be forever. Our hearts washed clean and inscribed permanently with the freedom of God's law. No more white-knuckling it. No more trying and failing to be pure in heart and meek and a peacekeeper. Always fighting to keep our sin and our selfishness at bay. Jesus says, no, that's not the future I have in store for you. So you're not everything you're supposed to be yet. Don't panic. Don't despair. And don't give up. You're not what you once were. And you're not yet what you will be. Take heart. Remember, the debt is paid. You've been given new life and transferred from the kingdom of darkness to the kingdom of light. The stain of your sin has been washed away forever. He is changing you. He's changing all of us. And one day, this whole world will change, and all will be made new.